Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. My guest today, Mark Sangster. He's Vice President of Industry and Security Strategist for a fascinating firm, eSentire. And so that's just kind of the Cliff Note overview here. What Mark is doing and what eSentire is up to, I think, is a fascinating exploration of what it means to be able to consistently access the soul of business in a manner that allows for safekeeping, if you will. And what I mean by that will become more clear as we go into this conversation. But Mark, I want to just welcome you real quickly, and then I'll give you, the audience just a real quick riff on who you are and why they really should pay attention to this conversation today.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Blaine. Thanks for having us on.
You bet. You're the author of a book that I've poked around a little bit in. No Safe Harbor is the meta title, and then the footnote title on it is The Inside Truth About Cybercrime and How to Protect Your Business. And you speak on stages all over the world. Been at the Harvard Law School, the RSAConference. You authored various subjects related to all kinds of stuff around cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And eSentire, as a company that you are involved very heavily with, was founded in 2001. So we're going to explore just kind of how all of this came together, because your personal journey is kind of interesting, and I'd like to be able to touch on that, as well as how you ended up 20 years ago at this place called eSentire and how it's grown. So with all of that, kind of in the play here, the question that always comes forefront is, when you hear the term the soul of business, what does that evoke for you, and either personally or professionally, or professionally?
Interesting, right? So I think the soul is kind of an energy, and it's a vibration. In fact, interestingly, I take sort of a view of spiritual things, and I kind of frame them in a sort of a scientific way, right? That I think anything that we deal with, right, the universe, all this kind of stuff, right, gravity and the sun coming up and the sun setting, that's just part of a bigger engine, and we're a part of that too, right? So it's understanding how to align and, effectively how to flow, right? You can row against the river all you want, but at the end of the day, it's going to take you where it means to take you.
Yeah. How to flow. You're the first guest I've had on this, and we've got about 60 episodes now. You're the first one that I've heard speak to the how to flow component of soul as energy. And I really think that's fundamentally what a business is up to. Yeah, how do we flow in this thing that we call our marketplace? And there are impediments to that flow. I mean, if we talk about turbidity and turbulence, data is, businesses live and breathe and die on data. When we look at the soul of business from a cybersecurity perspective, or just from a security perspective, what kind of comes up for you in that regard too?
Yeah, for me, I think it's about, understanding what your intrinsic value is. And, one of the things we saw in the past that I think really drives the company, the soul of the company, is that, we started in the financial industry. And of course, criminals rob banks because, that's where the money is, right? The old Willie Sutton sort of quote or misquote. Yeah. And what you see in those kind of industries is that they're highly regulated, right? So they've got all these rules in place. And, all too often we saw these victims sort of saying, yeah, but we were 100% compliant. And eventually we got to that point where we said, listen, you can be 100% compliant to all these rules. You can also be 100% owned by these criminals. So forget trying to, meet the rules. Forget trying to check a box, and actually do what you need to do. Do what's right here to protect your industry. If that means going above what's on that checklist, then that's what you got to do, right? Like, think of the spirit of the law in this case and less about the letter of the law, because that's what's going to keep you safe at night.
That gets into a very, I think, interesting economic conversation, because doing what's right oftentimes is expensive. When you think about it, just in terms of the thought process that the executives in the organization are going to pay attention to, because it's not. That's a top line cost. It just drops right into making sure we're safe here. And the default would be, as you're saying, like, well, we checked the box, we were compliant. when we first started talking, SolarWinds, the SolarWinds breach was a
That's right.
big news story. MSN exchanges, since replaced it in some way, shape, or form. And right now, I mean, and this will date this podcast just a little bit, but the oil gas line breach, largest gas line on, so the infrastructure, these guys are doing compliance. They check the boxes. How does eSentire come into play with this? Because you guys are a market leader. Basically, you're a market creator in this whole field. How do you work with clients? And I'm very interested here in your experience in working with executives to get them to understand the need to do what's right rather than to do what the checkbox algorithm suggests that they should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest issues, right? So, I talk about this in the book that cybersecurity is not an IT problem to solve. It's a business risk to manage, right? So we got to stop talking in ones and zeros and, switches and settings and talk about business risk. And that's where I start, right? What's a risk? Well, there's a threat. There's a likelihood of that threat occurring. And when it does, there's some kind of consequence, whether it's financial or operational or whatever it might be. And you have to balance that with what the cost is of ensuring that that doesn't happen. Because you're absolutely right. If you have whatever it is, $1 million in your bank, using my sort of Willie Sutton analogy, and you're spending 20 million a year to protect it, well, you're probably, you could go 20 years of being robbed and break even here, right? So that doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's kind of where we start, is to help them understand risk. So, who's out there? Why would they target you? What are they trying to steal? How do they go about it? And then what are your obligations there, right? And that would be, we've talked about a lot of box checking here. So regulators and compliance, but it's more than that. It's contracts with your clients, right? It's being a player in a supply chain. So imagine in manufacturing, you're a subcomponent provider in the automotive industry. Well, something you do may have dire consequences downstream. You can't supply that part, that causes a shortage in a just-in-time, supply model, and now you're halting an extremely expensive, manufacturing facility that has to wait until they can build up enough stock again to start working. And that's where execs start to, the switch clicks, because they start with what I'd call the kind of the de facto jargon. Well, what's the total cost of operating, or what's ROI? What's the ROI on security? And I turn that around to them and I say, when you say ROI, I think you mean return on investment, but I think in terms of, risk of incarceration, right? Or, risk of an operation. And then it becomes the, so what would it look like if your factory floor got shut down for 3 weeks? So as, the sort of thing we're seeing with the pipeline now, because that's what you're dealing with. Not, as I say, it's not a simple financial equation, and there is no magic security box that solves the problem.
Yeah, there's an interesting split. This kind of gets into semantics, but from an operational perspective, we spend money, and that's just kind of what we do as businesses. And the category can be either cost or it can be investment.
Right.
And cost, it's you don't recover that. In most people's minds, that's just something that kind of goes out the door. In investment, there's an expectation of something coming back in return. So what I'm hearing you talk about here a little bit, and I want to explore this a little with you, is the mindset around risk mitigation. The mindset of risk mitigation, because life is risky. I mean, we're not getting out of this alive, right? In a very fundamental. So how do I mitigate the risk, and what's the investment that is necessary for me to make in this? And I guess where I'd like to kind of go with this is, I think it was Peter Drucker. No, it wasn't Peter Drucker. Warren Bennis. Managers do what's right, and leaders do the right thing. That's managers, IT managers are doing what's right, and it's the check a box. And this kind of goes back to mindset here. What's the mindset that needs to be opened up so people can really appreciate what doing the right thing means?
Yeah, so I think this is back to our soul statement, right? About kind of vibrating at the right frequency, and it is that. So it's the, what, like I said, what do our risks look like? So what do we have that we have to protect? What have we agreed when it comes to the management of those things, right? And in the sense of the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, right? Mm-hmm. And then what do we need to do to go about protecting it? And I think that's a big issue that we see, and that's certainly where, we provide that 24/7, we call it managed detection and response service. So, we're constantly looking in their networks and their environments. We're looking for things that look suspicious. When we find them, we investigate them, and then we contain them, right? So if we think it's bad, we're going to stop it before it ever metastasizes and becomes the kind of business disrupting things that we read about in headlines. But from an executive perspective, you're nailing it, which is, what do I have to spend here? Where do I put my focus? And it's just like any other element of the business, right? If I said to you, who are the top clients you can't lose, right? Or what business sector brings you the most money? Like you work in whatever field, and that we know our finance clients are the most lucrative, or our healthcare clients are the most lucrative, or we know that if we had some kind of violation, we could never participate in that segment anymore because, with these kind of, if we had multiple breaches, well, no hospital would be able to trust us with their patient records, or it would become prohibitive from an insurance perspective, or the kind of effort that we'd have to put in to pass muster with a regulator. So we know we're kind of out of the game, right, per se. And those are the things that matter, right? So what truly matters to you? It's the, from a corporate perspective, it's the, what are the three things you take to the tropical island if you were, deserted for the rest of your life? And they have to really decide, truly prioritize. And then that's where you put your focus, because if I again use the bank analogy, can you keep the bank robbers outside the building? No, they can pick locks and break windows, right? Can I protect all the documents in the bank? No, I can't. But what I can do is say, I'm going to put the most critical stuff in the vault. That's where I put my efforts. That's where I double down. That's where my guards wait, all of that. And that's exactly what you have to do in security is, you can't cover, 100% of the border. What you have to know is the pieces that are the most vulnerable, or the places where the river's the shallowest, I guess, and that's where the bad guys are going to cross. And you got away from the other side, right? And that's where you take your stand at that choke point.
Yeah. I love the use of metaphors, and you're pretty adept at using them here. As a business owner myself, eSentire, I mean, it's an enterprise sized organization. You
Right.
work with some of the largest companies on the planet around these security issues. As you have in the last 21 years that you've been associated with eSentire,
Mm-hmm.
how would you talk to a small business owner, mid-sized business owner, as well as an enterprise business owner? Is there a different conversation to be had around security?
Absolutely. So that's another dimension on the chart here, right? Is there's obviously the assets and the things you have to protect. And of course, the more damaging they can be, obviously, the more controls and protection you have to put in place.
Mhm.
But the other side is to say, when I go back to, if you have, $1 million in the bank, you're not going to spend 20 million to defend it. It is the same thing in a small to medium sized business. And frankly, there is no, line in the sand. There is no, bar that we all say, well, if we, check those boxes, we hit some level of sustainability. Yeah. So for small, medium businesses, there are, again, it's back to what's the most critical for you. And at that point, it's fundamentals in place, right? Using proper, password hygiene is an example, and using what's called multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. And that means, we've all done this, right? We put that, we log in and we get a text message with 6-digit code sent to our phone, and then we enter that 6-digit. And it's just a secondary gateway that's there to say, not only do I have to have my username and my password, but I also have to be in possession of a registered device like my mobile phone. And it doesn't eliminate everything, but it starts to reduce those risks. And it also, from a business owner's perspective, you are starting to demonstrate a bit of reasonable care here, right? You've shown, if we think about basic law here, what would the common person do, right? What's a reasonable expectation for any individual who's not an expert in this? You kind of just got to show that, like recognize, look, I know there was a risk here. I've seen other companies like mine be attacked. Here's some basic measures that I put in place to protect myself. Because no one's expecting you, as a small business owner, to put in, to have the kind of resources that a major bank would have, right? They don't expect you to have hundreds of security employees and an 8 or 9 figure security budget and, all that kind of stuff. Like, that's just completely unreasonable. So there is certainly an element to this where it is to scale, right? What made sense for your business?
As you were talking, I was making a couple of notes here. Everything about business, everything about life, everything about life is a function of relationship and relationship quality. my
Mhm.
relationships are working, I'm going to have a pretty good shot at being successful in life as well as in business. And the foundation of that is going to be trust.
Oh, absolutely.
And so where I'm going with this is I started playing with a model about, just kind of what is trust. First of all, not a lot of people understand really what trust is. They use it as a placeholder, but they're really talking about competency or,
Mhm.
character or a number of different things here. But one of the things that I've been working with here lately is a three-legged stool analogy. I grew up on a farm and I used to milk a cow on a three-legged stool. It was pretty stable. And I trusted that I wasn't going to land in a cow pie if I if I wasn't careful here. But the three legs that I'm referencing are intimacy, safety, and freedom. And where this comes into play with this whole notion of security, intimacy, you're talking to folks, and I'm just going to run this by you and I'd like comment on it. Yeah, intimacy. What do we need to prioritize? Are we intimately familiar with what is crucially important to who we are as a business? And that's where the soul of the business comes into play. What's our crown jewels, so to speak? So the intimacy around that, what do we need to do to protect them? Safety is the development of basically a risk mitigation strategy that you're talking about, and actually on an ongoing basis, so that you feel safe in the protection structure that you put in place here. Right. And as a consequence of that, you're free to do a lot of different things that you probably wouldn't do because you felt constrained. So the net of this is the greater my security blanket, rather than being constrictive, actually it produces more freedom in terms of how I relate to my marketplace. Now that's my theory. So I'd welcome, just kind of your thoughts on that.
So I think you're right, right? Security is often seen as inconvenient or restricting freedom, right? Well, I can't access information on this device, or, man, I need, 15 passwords and all this kind of stuff just to get to it. And that certainly, security, frankly, the industry hasn't done itself any favors in that respect. But it really does align to your three legs of the stool here, right? Because from an intimacy perspective, we are with our clients exposing those crown jewels, right? We are telling them our secrets and where we're most vulnerable. So we do have to establish rapport there. And that is a critical element. And from a security perspective, frankly, it doesn't have to be restrictive anymore. And I think, when I said earlier a second ago that, we haven't done ourselves any favor in the security industry, it's true, because we took this sort of self-righteous kind of view of, well, if you don't do these things, badness will occur and it's on you. And we can't look at it like that, right? We have to expand and we have to evolve and adapt. So it becomes more business freeing because, for example, you look and say a new technology is emerging and you say, you know what, Internet of Things is an example. I could really use this, or artificial intelligence, or, pick your acronym, right? This would really accelerate my business in these ways, faster time to market, or expand the markets we can serve, or reduce our costs. But there's a risk associated. So security is kind of there to align to those business objectives, right? To say, they're not there to say, no, thou shalt not do this, or, thou shalt not use this tool. It should very much be the opposite, which is enabling it, right? And looking at, okay, I get this. I understand why you want to move all this data to the cloud. I see the business rationale for this. Those are all the benefits and the cost. Now I'm going to help work out what the risk and the risk cost equation look like, and then it's our job to align to that, right? So it isn't a get a blessing. This is like it's a team sport here, right? Like, we are supposed to figure out how to drive that business forward and not actually be the anchor that's constantly slowing it down.
Now we're gonna take a break right now. When we come back, I want to talk about that little piece right there, security as a strategic partner to the business, and we'll explore that when we come back. I want to thank you for listening. I want to also invite you right now to go to blainebartlett.com. And on that site, which is my personal website, you'll see services up on the top menu. I'd like you to click on Leadership Mastermind. Now, why I want you to do that is we have structured a mastermind program that is very unusual and it is very powerful. And by going onto that site and clicking that link, you'll be taken to a landing page that is an invitation to join this mastermind. It's a 52-week long exploration of what it takes to be a highly effective leader in today's fast-changing environment. You won't regret it. And if you've been liking what you've been listening to on these Soul of Business podcasts, how does one become a leader that can keep connection to the soul of business? That's what we look at. That's what we're about in this mastermind program. So again, go to blainebartlett.com and click on the services link. And there you'll find the link to the Leadership Mastermind program. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for listening to this little commercial. And now back to our show. Welcome back. This is Blaine Bartlett. We're speaking right now with Mark Sangster. And Mark just had an interesting point for, at least to me, and I'm the only one that's important here, obviously, so I'm just going to riff with it. But the idea that security is not an anchor in the organization. It actually can be, if it's positioned effectively, a strategic partner in the growth of the organization. So I'm just going to drop that in your lap, Mark, and see where you kind of go with it. How would you approach that?
Yeah. Again, I start with the security or cybersecurity is not an IT problem to solve. It's a business risk to manage. So it is really about being a partnership in the organization, having, at least in larger companies, a seat at the table, right? And again, it's not constantly to be the person who comes back and always says, well, we can't do this because of X, right? It's more about this is what we need to enable. Or you know what? This maybe is the cost. Okay, so you want to move into this, you want to adopt this new technology, that's great. But here's some of the risks we have. We don't have expertise in this space. So perhaps we need to outsource that, right? Maybe we want to hire in some consultants who know what to do here. Or we want to engage our legal team because we want to make sure that whatever contract we write up and we sign ourselves to with those vendors makes sense. And so, we understand our divisions of duty and who does what and when. And if something bad occurs, how have we indemnified ourselves? Or who pays for what? These are just normal things. We do this in every other course of life, and frankly, in business, you do it in every other course of doing business, right? When you sign a contract with a client or other vendors. So it's just really thinking about that risk perspective as well. And and at the executive level, that's helping them understand that, helping them through awareness training, for example, understand what bad guys are trying to pull, and and how they use new technology because they know the companies are less familiar with it. That's sort of part of the story. But then the other side is also getting people to embrace it. So if you're constantly putting out bulletins saying, don't do this, or stop clicking on that, or you have the wall of shame for the people who've clicked on, phishing emails, these kind of things, all you're doing is discouraging cooperation, right? You want people to understand why they do it. So here's why I'd like you to sign in using two-factor authentication, or here's why we don't want you clicking on these things or pick up the phone and validate the request before you execute it, because here's how they target you, and here's what they're doing, and here's what it looks like as a cost to the business. Because then people kind of go, okay, now I get it, right? This isn't just another, security proving its value here, right? Or, earning its money. And so, and then when you do that, you kind of empower them, right? So we go back to your three stools, right? That gives them a bit more intimacy. They understand why they're doing it, so they feel more secure. But now they understand if they stick within these kind of guidelines, they have the freedom they need because they can do their job and they can do it effectively.
Yeah, I love that. Part of the leadership work that I do is organized around the definition that I work with around leadership, which is co-creating coordinated movement in the system that produces the results that we want. And it's that two pieces, co-creating coordinated movement. So in the context of what we're speaking about here, security, co-creating that, so it's not just an edict, it's not just something that I'm seeking compliance from my people around. How do I go about co-creating that? And awareness precedes choice. So one of the things that I hear you talking about is being able to generate not the business case for this, but the personal meaning, linking it to some for the sake of what. That is ecumenical to the soul of the business or to something that somebody personally cares about. And that context management, context generates meaning. So business case is one context. The for the sake of what might be a bigger or more effective context to work with. Do you have some examples? And I'm going to just, hopefully not put you too harshly on the spot here, but examples where you've seen that conversation actually be leveraged very effectively, where it moved away from compliance to an aha. That's why I want to be able to do that. Yeah, at the line level.
Yeah, you're right. All in many cases, unfortunately, for lack of better terms, a contract gets signed and then it's chucked over the fence, and everyone has to figure out how to comply.
Right.
But where I really saw a lot of this take place actually was over the last year, where a lot of workers moved to a remote model, right, or a distributed model,
I was wondering about.
and bringing them in and helping them understand why they're doing something, right? And so, as you said, setting that context. And from a leadership perspective, the best conversation I saw, and actually in a mid-sized firm, was where the leaders, sort of stuck to, one of the sort of core tenets I'd say I live by when it comes to this, which is your job as the leader is to perhaps give them the what, right? But definitely it's not to tell them what the how, right? So they understand here's the objective we're attempting to achieve, right? We're going to go charge that hill and take the hill. Okay, that's great. But how they go about doing it, empower those people because they're smart people, right? They know what to do in their role. So now that you've given them a context, so they understand a target, they have a contextual, fabric around it that now tells them, that gives them the motivation and the why and so on. Now they can frame the how, because then they can go off and do it. Whereas a lot of times on the flip, what I see is the jump to solution when you haven't even defined the problem, right? Well, we're going to have remote workers, so we better go out and get a virtual private network. And it's like, well, maybe you already have one. Maybe that's not the problem, right? Or people aren't using it and they're not using it because of this reason, right? Like it slows things down when you use it because you don't have, the right bandwidth, whatever it might be, right? Having those kind of team level kind of conversations where you demonstrate that, or you allow you create a forum that allows everyone to show their expertise. And that's actually really, really critical, not just in the planning phase, but frankly when there's an incident. And that's what we see all the time, right? Is, I kind of joke about the different characters, the hero who feels they need to be the loudest voice in the room and demonstrate that they did something, they sacrificed for the company, or I'm the highest paid person in the room, I have the most senior rank, the authoritarian kind of approach that's hierarchical, that says, well, sorry, I've got more gold on my shoulder, so therefore you're going to do what I say to do. That leaves the introverts out, right? The quiet person who really does have a good answer, or the people, like I said, who feel like they need to make decisions when they don't. They need to provide information, right? That sets context going in the other direction for those leaders to then make decisions.
The idea of responsibility comes to mind here. And when I'm looking at it through the lens of co-creating, coordinated movement, that co-creation piece is ultimately, if I'm doing it well, there's an ownership transfer that's occurred. It's not, I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because now I want to, because something's in place that's meaningful to me. And the idea of responsibility, who's responsible for security? It's not IT. IT may be an implementer, but who's responsible? That's shared ownership. And it's interesting how responsibility gets learned about, I think, for most people on this planet. And I remember wrestling with my younger brother when we were probably about 4 or 5 years of age. And one of us, I don't remember who it was, but I do remember the incident. We knocked the lamp off the coffee table and it shattered. And I remember mom coming in going, who's responsible for this? And real early on, responsibility started getting equated to blame.
Oh, absolutely.
And then that starts to get reinforced over and over and over again. Who wants to take responsibility for IT? Not me. Who wants to take responsibility for security? Not me. Yeah. Because I'll be blamed if there's a breach. Ownership is different than that. I'm able to respond. And where I'm going with this long piece here is communication is what makes responsibility work. In my experience, it's if we've got open lines of communication where we can share where we're noticing breaches, where we can share when we can actually say this hasn't worked well, that's responsible behavior from my perspective. And that begins to open the door to all kinds of other things I think that might be worth exploring. So just how does eSentire, and I'm going to speak to this because that's my monologue. Now I want to hear from you on this. How does eSentire, in the work that you do with your clients, and this is outside of the actual tech piece, but the implementation, how do you get ownership?
So that's interesting. And one of the things that we do that's sort of paramount is I guess there's two elements. In a planning phase, we help them do what's called sort of a risk assessment and a risk evaluation, where we look at all those factors and their obligations and we help them map them out. But more importantly, I actually find it's doing things like we call them incident response simulations or workshops. And this is the idea of, you have all the players who need to be at the table. So the executives, the technical leaders, HR, marketing for communications, and so on. And you walk them through these scenarios because you're 100% right. And in fact, when I do this kind of work, I actually talk about some of the biases that we bring to the table as humans, right? And some of this actually comes from, I spend a lot of time looking at things like airline disaster accident investigation, because they have a really good model for understanding what's happening, legislating controls to try and reduce or minimize that risk, and that continuous learning loop. And the two big things I see in this one that we all suffer from is outcome bias and hindsight bias, right? And hindsight bias is that notion of, well, now that I know somebody pushed the wrong button and I see this terrible outcome, I would have never done that. You know what I mean? Like, I would have avoided this if that was possible. Well, of course, the person was speeding on the interstate, right? Well, that's why they got in an accident. And then there's the blame part, right? Which is the second part, is the outcome, where you start to say, well, now that we know somebody didn't, they clicked on a link they shouldn't have, or they refused to use some control, or they logged in to a business system using a personal device that wasn't properly protected, we should fire that person. Right? Like, if, like you say, if Joe hadn't clicked on that link in the first place, we wouldn't be in this situation. And that is so far from the truth, because in all of these things, like my aircraft accident comparison, there's a combination of factors that go into this, right? So you're right. So they clicked on that link, but you could have had, that was a well-known lure. So, email filtering would have blocked it. Or what about a security awareness training that would have helped them understand why they shouldn't do that, right? What about phishing testing that, has been proven to greatly reduce the likelihood that someone will click? What about automated controls that would have prevented some of this, and so on down the line? Because you see this in security all the time, is blaming somebody, right? I call it ready, aim, shoot. So you fire the person, or you fire the vendor, right? You're like, well, you caused a screw up, you're fired. And then we forget, well, now they're going to get their lawyer and they're going to go to, legal guns, because they have to protect themselves. So they're no longer your ally, right? They're no longer contractually obligated to you, where you did have some control. We see that a lot. And when you do that, you miss the point here, right? You don't actually fix the root cause, you fix a symptom. And then, and ultimately when we do that, right, we're not seeking forward accountability. So it isn't asking about who did what wrong, but asking them why they made the decisions they did. Because a lot of times, like I said, in hindsight, we look back and we see, with all the data and in the daylight, we can go, oh, well, we understand what went wrong here. But in those situations where they're stressful, where you don't have 100% of the information that's required at the time, we make the best decisions we can. So you want to shape that methodology, not punish it, right? Because otherwise you're not seeking forward accountability, you're not fixing the problem, and frankly, as we see time and time again, you're damned to repeat it, right? The same things will happen to you over and over.
Yeah, I love that, Mark. We've been listening to Mark Sangster, VP of Industry Security Strategies at eSentire. Where can listeners find out more about what you're up to, either personally, Mark, and because I want you guys to get his book. I mean, whatever the size of your business is, whatever it is that you're doing, No Safe Harbor, the Inside Truth About Cybercrime and How to Protect Your Business. Must read. You got to get it. I'm assuming people can get it at all of the typical places, Amazon, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazon, Barnes, other online retailers, Audible, iTunes, Google Play, all of those. It's available in the various formats.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
with eSentire, how can people find out a little bit more about what you guys are up to and how what you're doing can assist?
Yeah, absolutely. Visit our website, eSentire.com, right? So there's lots of, this is the basic stuff, what's the service and how do we do that? But there's lots of information about the different industries we serve. And, reach out to me as well. My contact information is on the site. Reach out to any one of the execs, and, we're more than willing to have that conversation. We have lots of lessons we've learned that we've seen, and often being able to do that from that elevated height allows us to say, you know what? I know you think this is you're unique. You think the situation is different, but your different looks an awful lot like a lot of other people's different. And you know what, we can help, we can bring that collective knowledge or tribal knowledge, right? Bring that to bear to protect your business.
Yeah. And protect the soul of the business in the process.
Absolutely.
Because if your business goes down, you're missing the opportunity that you would have had to make a difference in the world through your business. Mark, I want to thank you very much. Speaking of differences, how are you leaving it better than when you found it?
You know, for me, it's demystifying the misconceptions, right? Helping those businesses, like small and medium-sized businesses, recognize that they do have something worth stealing. And it doesn't matter where they're, you know, they might be located in the Midwest and they're not in a major capital city. So how would some criminal on the other side of the world know they exist? And then once they understand that there's a real problem there, then helping them figure out how they can protect their business, right? Go about identifying those risks and mitigating those risks, because there's no easy answer. But frankly, until you start that dialogue and that conversation, you know, until you understand there's a problem, you're never going to seek a solution.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mark Sangster, Vice President over at eSentire. You're listening to Blaine Bartlett and the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. You can find out more about what I'm up to on my website at blainebartlett.com. Check it out. I think you'd appreciate some of the resources we've got there as well. And until next time, thank you for listening.